I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Dr. Julia Mossbridge. Julia has a PhD in Communication Sciences and Disorders from Northwestern University, an MA in Neuroscience from UC San Francisco, and a BA with honors in Neuroscience from Oberlin College. For the past 15 years, she's been studying the psychology, physiology, and physics of precognition and time travel. As an internationally renowned expert on prediction, she's addressed audiences around the world in her work shaping the field of time travel. She's taught intensives on precognitive forecasting to executives at Google X and the Vail Symposium, invented and patented the Choice Compass app, and currently pursues her mental and informational time travel and precognition research as funded by the Robert Wood Johnson and Bial Foundations. She joins us today to discuss her research into cognitive neuroscience, predictive abilities, the mysteries of the human mind, the UAP phenomena, and much more. So, Julia, welcome. Science is getting boring, less innovative, fewer disruptions in our understanding of the universe. What's going on?
Let's see if we can make it more fun just by talking about it.
Yeah,
It's so
yeah.
nice to see you, Tim. I love how you're wearing a tie and I'm wearing overalls.
Your overalls look great. I love your overalls. Those are,
Me
yeah.
too. They're fun. I love them. I have multiple pairs now. Um, Actually, my overall story is a time travel story. I do this thing where I help people with mental time travel as part of some technology that helps people get better from healing trauma. And every time I would talk people through, connecting with your future self and seeing if they have something to share with you, my future self would be wearing overalls. And at the time, I didn't know that I had forgotten. And I didn't realize that I could just go buy overalls for some reason. And I thought, I gotta buy overalls because my future self is wearing them. And now I'm that future self wearing overalls. So
There you go. There you go. So with the tie, I thought maybe suspenders. I
yeah,
could bring it back, right?
bring it back.
Do
Yeah, you
kind of
have
that.
that kind of influence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that 1940s vibe. That was what I was thinking. The 40s, the suspenders and the tie, and.
Totally. You could I guess you would have to smoke like cigars from a humidor, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, yep. And I have like a metal fan on my desk. Get the whole
Yeah.
40s newsroom vibe going on.
I'd just
So,
be in black and white. Everything's in black and white. Um,
well, so what
why is
I think
science
what
getting
we're
boring?
No, what we're talking about, yeah, and I think really what you were talking about was incrementalism in science, right? And you
Yeah.
mentioned Russell Funk and Michael Park at the
Yeah.
University of Minnesota, and then Aaron Leahy at the University of Arizona. They studied this problem. They were able to get their results published in Nature. That's kind of where the starting point that you'd sent to me. So, what was their explanation for science being boring?
Well, they had several, well, actually so they discussed the meat of the paper is about their findings, showing that in fact the number of sort of transformational discoveries that have been made in the last couple of decades has actually slowed down, even though more people are doing science. We've got the internet, so we can do it faster. We should be able to have conversations all over the world and like really exponentially grow this thing. So one explanation is, well, we've basically figured out most of the things and everything else is filling in the blanks. Okay, that's not an acceptable explanation for them or for anyone else
Well,
because
didn't
it's
didn't they try and close the patent office down a while back because they
yeah,
had
yeah,
that
that
same.
that always happens when people are just about to make giant discoveries. So this is sort of the history. If you think about like Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolutions, this is what happens when people are on the verge of recognizing like, oh, our entire model of the universe is wrong. Uh-oh. And there's always this phase where people say, well, we're not really making much progress. Maybe it's because we discovered everything. Well, that's just clearly not the case. Um, Another explanation is, look, there's so much pressure to publish. People, there's so much competition to get grants, funding, that scientists are going to stick to what's tried and true. There's this thing that you're taught as a graduate student and a
Yeah.
postdoc, which is don't write a grant for something that you're not already about halfway or three-quarters done with, um, so that you can quickly turn it around and have your papers come out. And I was like the least by the book graduate student and postdoc ever, probably. But I think that squashes productivity in science, but I don't think it has anything to do with transformational discovery or disruptive discovery. So I have a different solution that wasn't part of their Nature article. They may have considered it, but they didn't put it in the article. So you want to hear what I think that is? Or should
Yeah,
I?
yeah.
Should I?
Well,
Yeah.
one of the things that interests me about this is this goes back. I've heard this argument several times. Um, Science is, you know, you can't change science. You can only add to it. You can't disrupt what's already come. You can just, basically extend it and add on to it, right? And so, in a sense, science itself tends to quash disruption until, as you said before, everything gets disrupted. They throw everything out, and so it's kind of like you can only build on this, this perfect model of the world, until it
Yeah,
turns
yeah,
out that, hey, the ether isn't real. Let's get rid of the ether, and then everything changes, like relativity or
right.
quantum mechanics or something along those lines.
Well, the idea that you can't undo science and that you can only add to it is sort of a squashing idea. I don't think that's actually accurate. I mean, I think that that's not really how it works. I mean, what really happens is just the second part of what you said, which is all of a sudden, wait, the ether's false. We have to rethink everything. Or wait, the Earth isn't the center of the solar system. We have to rethink everything.
Yeah.
Or wait, it turns out quantum effects actually apply to things larger than quantum particles. Oh, heck, we have to rethink everything. And so it feels to me like that's more the rule, but because there is a human drive, it's a psychological drive towards stability, towards wanting to know, reducing uncertainty. So we want it to be like, well, now we've got it figured out. We want to be able to tell the kids, like, kids, we kind of got it figured out. You can go fill in the blanks, but we kind of got this figured out. Look, we can make, GPS systems. We could launch people on rockets to the moon. We can explore Mars. We must have figured some stuff out. And for sure we have, right? That's not false. It's just that the theory that underlies our model of everything is going to radically change. And you can
Yeah.
tell that because of all the little bits of anomalous data that are coming up and telling us, wait a minute, we're kind of wrong about something.
Well, I have a saying that makes me universally hated in the scientific community, which is all science is social science because all science is done by people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and like physicists just, I just get these evil stares, and they're like, yeah, we hate the social sciences. I'm like, well, you may hate them, but guess what? That's it, it's reality. It doesn't, I mean, no matter how wonderfully accurate or precise science is, ultimately it's interpreted and discussed and, written down by people.
Well,
So
the great irony of physics is most physicists I've met, not all, but most physicists I've met anyway, seem to delight in that. Look, our field is objective and independent of people. That our field is the only one where we can really tell you what's going on because we take ourselves out of the equation. So the irony of that is, of course, what they discover is that they're in the equation the entire time.
yeah, yeah.
So
Well,
it's
so
just kind of a joke.
So what was your explanation? You had an alternative explanation for why science is getting boring. And and
Yeah.
and then you were going to talk about edge science as well. That was
Yeah.
something on our list.
Yeah, well, that's actually part of I think, the alternative explanation. So I think the piece of the alternative explanation that I want to highlight, and I'm sure there's more than one explanation because this is a complicated problem, but the piece of the explanation that I want to highlight is twofold. And the first fold is edge science. It's that because of the taboo against edge science and people not understanding that edge science is kind of a field that has different rules, it's still a scientific sort of group of fields, but it has different rules in terms of what's considered appropriate to do in that field versus mainstream, more settled science. That the discouragement that arises from this taboo and the lack of funding of edge science ends up creating a world in which you're only allowed to publish something if people already agree that it's true, or it's pretty proximal, pretty close to something that people already agree is true. Or if you want to publish something that's far flung from what people think is true, it's got to be in these journals that like no one ever reads, you know, so people don't hear about it. So it's kind of obvious that that would reduce that cultural problem, would reduce innovation. Because if I'm afraid that I won't get continued funding if I point out something like that there might be mental effects on physical systems, if I'm afraid that I won't get funding by pointing that out, then something that is as disruptive as that in terms of our worldview and our technology um, doesn't get the airtime.
Well, and if I could interject for a second, a lot of it depends on the terminology and the cultural sociological fit, right? Like, so I mentioned ether a moment ago, which, will get you burned at the stake. I mean, literally, I've had people yell at me, in like conference situations. If you say the word ether, you're going to get, again, you get these evil looks. And they're like, that doesn't exist. It was gone 100 years ago. So instead use something like quantum foam. Oh yeah, yeah,
Oh
no,
yeah,
that's
that's
totally
fine.
real. Yeah,
That's fine.
so you mentioned, mind matter interactions, right? And that's suspiciously close to psychic effects, right? Same
Yeah.
thing. It's like, well, you can't do that. That's mediums, right? Conjuring ghosts. So instead, I like to use the word observer effect, which is totally cool, and it's more or
It's the
less the
same
same
thing.
thing, right?
Well, if you can explain the observer effect, then you can explain mind matter interactions. I mean, so yeah, in a way, it's exactly the same thing because the explanation would hold for both. But of course, physicists can't explain currently. Well, some believe they can, but they sort of write it off and say, "Oh, observation is really just an absorption." But that also doesn't seem to be the case. So, to my understanding, so yeah, it's tricky, and I think that's one of the main actually taboo areas is the release that's going to happen in the next hopefully 10 years or so, probably sooner, the release from a purely materialist worldview of science. So that's like the biggest taboo is, and the biggest disruption as a result. So the biggest taboo, I think, is in admitting that non-material things can be real and that they can have impact on material things. And the biggest disruption is science that shows that. And that's why we don't have so much disruption right now, because that's the biggest thing that we could disrupt, and you're not allowed to say it. So I think
Yeah.
that's interesting. And when I say you're not allowed to say it, I don't mean to imply that it's always right, that everyone who writes a paper about such a thing is accurately reporting what's going on or has done the statistics correctly, including myself, or has interpreted things correctly. I don't mean that. What I mean is when you don't invest in edge science that goes against our current understanding of the universe, what you're doing is saying you don't even want to ask the question. And if you don't ask the question, it doesn't lead to all the kind of amazing things that questions lead to when they're investigated that aren't necessarily what the person who investigates them thinks is going to happen, right? But there's something amazing that comes from it, something wonderful and useful, and also just kind of elegant about our relationship with the universe. So that's what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's so interesting to me. I mean, um, there's intellectual, psychological acceptance of things, right? And then there's emotional acceptance. And even in myself, yeah, so yesterday I was on LinkedIn or Twitter or one of the social networks, and I saw a report. They just released I think it was the ODNI 2022
Oh
UAP
yeah,
report, right?
yeah, yeah.
And then there was a letter from the Senate Intelligence Chairman, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but somebody who was, in the Senate high
Something
up.
like those words together, but I don't know what order the words were in.
Yeah, and so I was reading through it, he'd written something to the effect of, it's great work. We have increased reporting. There's less stigma about pilots discussing the possible threat from, UAP encounters, I was struck yet again by intellectually, it's like, okay, yes, the government is investigating UFOs. They are basically saying they're real, right? Reading between the lines, I mean, which isn't hard in this case, they've said it 50 different times, UFOs are real. But emotionally, I was just kind of like, UFOs are real. That is so absolutely insane. And yet here I am reading it, So I think a lot of people, when it comes to stuff like edge sciences, intellectually we can accept these things. I mean, the observer effect would be another example, right? Where it isn't real until you observe it, right? Which really comes down to this idea of consciousness. It's like intellectually I get that, but emotionally, man, that's hard to accept. And then every now and then it just clicks, and it's like that's really big.
It's huge. It's revolutionary, and it's but what we're talking about right now and we're talking about it's big, it's revolutionary, it gives us these feelings. It's not intellectual, the real piece is emotional. That's all subjective experience. And that's the kind of other, so I'm going to weave that back into the other fold of why I think things are being so disruptive lately in science is because um, scientists have gotten used to the idea of having power in our culture. So we've turned scientists sort of into these sort of demigods, right? Like, well, the scientist said it, so it must be true,
Well,
And right?
I would say priests. Actually, that was down there in my
Yeah,
question list. Priests.
priests. Yeah,
Could we say that science is a new
or
religion?
monks, or monks. Yeah, we could. I mean, you could, and I think there are people who hold to it like that. Um, I mean, even if you think about the academic world, the culture of the academia, you literally get hooded like a monk does when you get your PhD. Like you bend down and someone puts a hood on you. And I kept thinking, like, I am now a monk. Like,
Yes.
right? Right? I mean, it's so and it's also it can be cult-like in that way, right? So when I kind of stepped outside the doors of academia and said, I'm going to do some stuff with industry, I'm going to kind of like do things that you don't want me to do. Um, it's like there's a shaming process that you have to go through and then you reconnect and everyone's like it's fine but but that's kind of like what it would be like at a cult, so it's very maybe it's more similar to a cult than a religion. I don't know. And maybe some religions are cults, who knows. I'm not a religious scholar at all, but what I can say is that um, people do need to believe in something. And as we become more secular, I do think a lot of people have started believing in science kind of like as their God.
Yeah.
And there's many problems with that. So, and one of them is that the scientists start to get it that they're sort of powerful in the culture, and then they're reticent to be wrong. So as soon as you get into you're in a position of discovery, like I am in love with the scientific method and I have been all my life since I was a kid. And what I love about it is it puts you in a humble position in relationship with the universe. Like you're literally dancing with God, with nature, whatever you want to call it, and you're saying, well, is it like this? And nature's like, maybe, but it's sort of like this, but you have to figure it out because I'm not going to tell you right away. And then you're like, I'll try this. It's beautiful. And that's a discovery process. But if you're going into that discovery process with, so I'm right, and this is what I'm going to say, and I have to be right because I have to get my funding, I have to run my lab, da 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 da, I have to get, into particular societies or whatever, I have to win the prize. Good luck discovering anything that that makes you disagree with yourself, that
Well,
makes
and
you be wrong.
you run into these roadblocks too, right? Like the one that I've been picking on lately is dark matter. That's my whipping boy for the indefinite future. And that's because it's to my mind, right? Not being a scientist, to my mind, that's basically mathematical error. It's like you're doing the math, you're like the universe should be like this, it should be like that, and you're like, oh, this math doesn't, you know what? Dark matter, that fill in the blanks.
That's what it seems like to me, but I'm not a cosmologist. But what it seems like to me. Like, wait, instead of saying we must have done something wrong, some of our assumptions are wrong. It's like there must be this matter that like is most of the universe, but we just can't see in any way.
We can't see it, right? And
Yeah.
and now they're building, and and I have friends and I have colleagues who are actually building stuff to test for it, and I'm just hoping that they don't watch this because they'll probably again they will beat me within an inch of my life. But
Well,
I'm
hopefully,
just like,
hopefully not. I'll protect you.
you know,
I'll protect you
it seems like I'm just like
with my
I'm
monk
like
energy.
how could this not be a math error, right? Like, and
I don't know.
they're
Maybe it's real. I mean, maybe I wouldn't call it matter though. See, the problem with physicists have to call everything matter, right? I wouldn't call it
well,
like it might be consciousness.
what I think it is also it's a limitation of the model. See, in quantum mechanics, everything has to have wave particle duality, right? And so, like the best example, the one that I love to use is the phonon,
Oh
which
yeah.
isn't real. It
Yeah.
never was real. It's what do they call it? They call it a metaparticle, right? Which is I like to
You're
think of that as
talking about the sound-like particles, the phonon, not the photon.
yeah, because
Yeah.
sound is
Yeah.
compression waves in
Yeah.
atoms, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But in quantum mechanics, you can't just have a wave, so you
Yeah.
have to have a particle. So
Yeah.
they created the phonon, and I'm like,
Right.
okay. I was like, that's reaching, right? That would be the kind way to describe it.
Well,
But
I just think it's very the compulsion, and I'm going to call it a compulsion. I come by that honestly. Um, but the compulsion to simplify and make rules for the universe to describe the universe is actually a beautiful compulsion that physicists have. And that's what allows them to make so much progress sometimes. But when it gets in the way of seeing what's actually there, the sort of beauty that's actually there that doesn't follow the rules that you've made, this is the second problem of the lack of humility of really being able to see what's there for because you want the power of being right. And this is why scientists, we need people from the humanities to guide us. We really need to reintegrate ourselves with humanities scholars who can humble us. Like philosophers are better thinkers than scientists. They can tell us how we're making errors in our interpretations, in our reasoning behind the motivation for experiments. Sociologists can tell us how we're tricking ourselves based on our sociology of our culture. The anthropologists can tell us how we're using the past to make us fail in the future. I mean, like each field can actually help inform and help us do better science and actually make these breakthroughs. And because of the power that scientists have, I think we've sort of been like, soft sciences, you know.
That's yeah. Well, so if it's okay, I want to change topic and ask you about the UAP phenomena. And the reason is, simply put, ratings, right? I'll just put ratings. That's it, right there.
Okay.
I'm a podcaster, so I don't officially have ratings, but I still chase the idea of it. And so you're probably one of the most skilled, rigorous people in terms of remote viewing that I know. And so when it comes to remote viewing, this is an area where tons of people have quote unquote attempted to remote view UAP or UFOs. The problem is it goes instantly into the world of subjective, and a lot of what they're saying is just stuff that's in their imagination, right? Stuff that's been put in there from Hollywood over the years. Whereas with remote viewing, you actually have a better approach to that. Can I ask what have you, if anything, what are your perspectives on UAP? And I should ask, what are your perspectives in general? And then how has remote viewing changed those?
Okay, I just have to correct you. There's no way you're correct. I mean, it's very nice of you to say, but if you're talking about me being most rigorous in terms of my remote viewing ability, that can't be what you're talking about because I'm an okay remote viewer. I think what you're talking about is scientific analysis of remote viewing. Is that
Okay.
correct?
Yeah.
That's got to be better because I know remote viewers who are better than me, and I have worked with them, and so I'm just telling you, that's just objectively wrong.
Okay. I'm just saying, I'm saying in terms of scientific rigor, right? In terms of
Okay.
not deluding yourself, in terms of not, one of the challenges is, remote viewing is one of those things that's popular and it's become kind of a social phenomena. And
Yeah.
so a lot of people are just, you know, they may or may not be seeing things, but the problem is there's no rigor there. There's no way to know if it's real. Maybe it's
Yeah.
just something that they're dreaming. And there's
Right.
nothing wrong with that. The problem is it's just not real. So,
Right. Okay. So I think you asked two really good questions. So first of all, what is my stance on the UAP thing? So to summarize, I mean, I I'm it seems to be that people are having these experiences, and sometimes these experiences are um, sort of unverifiable. Like I'm telling you after the fact, I saw something out my window. I didn't take a picture of it. I didn't take a film, but it looked like a UFO. And sorry, I'm just going to report it. Right? That's hard to. I mean, I'm not saying that didn't happen. What I'm saying is for people who are trying to investigate the phenomenon scientifically, that's hard to do something with.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But that doesn't mean it didn't exist. There's a whole subjective piece of this phenomenon that has to do with like orbs and ball lightning and people having the experience of being um, time stopping or their hair growing really fast or slow or whatever it is, right? So that all that stuff. I think there's a lot of subjective stuff that's really interesting and could be investigated. And who knows, right? I mean, I don't. I'll tell you that. I'll just say instead of saying who knows, maybe there is someone who knows. Who know? Who knows? Yes. Oh my God. When I start talking about this stuff, it's hard to keep into some sort of grammatical form. Um, then there's the things that NASA and the intelligence communities, especially the defense intelligence communities, are investigating. right? Why do our pilots have these weird, you know, aerial phenomenon happening? What's the deal with the sphere inside of the cube? Like what's the deal with UAPs appearing over nuclear sites? These are really important questions to ask.
Well, they are, and they speak in terms of the government. I think one of the challenges, one of the things that drives me nuts, I think it drives everybody nuts, is it seems like government officials speak in riddles, and there's a lot of wink, wink, nod, nod, right? And so, they're like UAP phenomena, which and then when you look at what they're describing, it's like, okay, you've got performance and effects and things like that. There's no way that this could be a quote unquote foreign power, but they throw out that foreign power thing, and then they're like, wink, wink, nod, nod. Yeah, it could be a foreign, like how foreign? Like, another galaxy? I mean, and that's
Well, I don't know. So there's a part of me that says, I mean, of course, all right, so I'm looking at this from the outside of that world. So I have no inside knowledge on that world, and I'm not a scientist who even studies that stuff. I am, for disclosure's sake, a recent member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Study,
I
right? Which is like, you're a member, right?
no, no,
Oh,
I should join. No, they're
they're
one of the
really
only
good.
groups. Yeah, I love what
They're
they're
really
doing.
good. And I'm an affiliate with the Galileo project through Avi Loeb, but I'm not doing much there. I'm just sort of like a fly on the wall. Um, but the SCU, I think, is very responsible, very good at investigating these things, and has some really just some great people. And anyway, I was talking with one of the folks there, and I just was informing myself, and I started getting really interested in. So what would a scientist like me who just, innocently says, well, what's the deal with UFOs? I mean, we should study them. They're an interesting scientific phenomenon. Maybe they are I'm not going to say they're not foreign, some kind of foreign weapon that we didn't figure out. I mean, what if our intelligence community wasn't on top of it and it was something that someone figured out, right? So it could be. Um, I'm not going to say it's not aliens. I'm not going to say it's not drones, right? I'm just going to like ask these questions. So I started interviewing people in the UAP science world. So other scientists who wanted to understand UAPs. And I just did a series of interviews. I think there are about 10, and I put them together in an article, which you can find on Medium. It's called What's UAPS, the UAP science system in the US. Everything outside of NASA, these organizations that are looking into UAPs and just getting an understanding of what's going on. And my understanding from that is, so first of all, this is a worldwide phenomenon. So it's not like
Yeah.
we're the only, that's really big. That's really important. We're not the only ones, right, being having these experiences. And the second is that um, there really do seem to be some, not when people talk about transmedium effects between air and water, so you've probably heard about that, right? But sort of what they're not talking about are sort of effects that make you think that there are other mediums that these things are going between, like
Hmm.
dimensional type mediums, like doing things with time, changing time or slowing it down or speeding
Well,
it up.
yeah. So let me ask about the time travel aspect of this. And I don't know if you have I don't know if you have kind of a full, I don't know, fully developed idea, I guess, yet. But
It's a fully developed like brain fart, so you can hear that.
well, okay, so like for instance, Jack Sarfati maintains that this is beings from the future, our distant ancestors that have come back in time to basically create their future, right? And so, if and he'll probably get upset with me for mangling his idea, but if I understand it correctly, what he's saying is this is the future creating itself, um, so
I
that
am so sympathetic. So I'm so sympathetic with that. That doesn't mean it's correct. I'm just saying it feels right. And since I was a kid, I kind of had that theory about UFOs. We had ball lightning at our place and weird stuff happening, and um, and of course I'm biased because I'm very interested in time travel and always have been, and um, so it doesn't feel like it has to be extraterrestrials, really. Right. It doesn't feel like that has to be the explanation. And it doesn't feel like it has to be a foreign power. It really feels like it could be literal United States citizens of the future doing this. That could be that sort of feels right to my tummy in an intuitive way. Um, So anyway, speaking of that, I wanted to find out in sort of a from other. So you could never really find out anything intuitively from other people because you're always filtering it through your own intuition, and it's almost the same thing with analysis, right? You're still filtering it through your own intuition. But in any case, I decided to do a remote viewing tasking on that question, but specifically because I was interested in whether a particular case that sounded to me very much like sort of a time travel incident, um, when I heard about it from someone at the SCU, Larry Hancock, what a neat guy.
Now, this was there was a signal involved, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, I, I'm just ignorant about this stuff. So he told me about this. So basically, then he sent me an article about it. So that's what I read. But basically, in 1957, there was a U.S. Air Force, I'm reading from this page, RB-47 reconnaissance aircraft. And it was around Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, flying around. And it detected um, a, an unidentifiable or unidentified airborne radio source that actually gave the friend or foe signal. I think it's called the IFF signal, but slightly altered. Okay, this is really interesting to me because when I was studying marine mammal, so anyway, so there was actual visual sighting. They had it on their radar. So it was like a real object. It played with their signal. They didn't respond. They kind of froze. They didn't know what to say because, like, why are you giving us this signal? Apparently their radar was jammed, but then it was also on their radar. I don't understand the technical stuff. You can look it up. It's called the RB-47 incident. So with that
Okay.
and the date, 1957, you can look it up. What was interesting to me is this, it reminded me of the meeting them at the Cap Point for the Nimitz event.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because when you're giving information about to the person about what they know, what you're saying is, I'm one of you, but it's slightly altered information, right? So in the case of the Cap incident, it's a meeting at the Cap Point. It's altered information in that we're going to get there first to show you that we have this information.
Okay.
In this case, in the RB-47 incident, we're going to give you the friend or foe signal slightly altered to let you know we know the signal and we're trying to communicate with you. We're
Okay.
giving you, right? So that's one way to see this. And so anyway, what I did was I ran a blind remote viewing study with about 5 viewers, I think. And it was, I do all of my remote viewing studies precognitively. What does that mean? That means people do the sessions first. They send me their transcripts, and they're already vetted and stuff. In this study, they weren't already vetted. So they were just people who were trying. They sent me their transcripts, and then I have a stack of transcripts. And then when I come across a need for a tasking, like after I had this conversation, I thought, well, I want to task this. When I come across a need for a tasking, I go grab, a stack of transcripts from the pile, and I say, okay, I am now, and this sounds so crazy, but this works pretty well, and it's not me who thought of it. I'm now applying this tasking to these transcripts, and I'm going to see what I come up with. It's almost like you're handed a Rorschach blot, and the question is, how are you going to relate this to this question? It's almost that abstract.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's very subjective, and so
I
it's
know how those work. Everything is a butterfly. Everything is happy, right?
yes,
Never seen, yeah. What do you see? It's
nothing
all
sexual or violent.
butterflies, rainbows. It looks like a unicorn over there. Yeah. I do well on those.
Yes, well, that's the right answer. So, um, so I had them specific. I'll read you. I think I had the tasking up here. I can read you the tasking. Let's see. Please describe. If anyone else wants to run this yourself. Please describe the intention and motivation of whatever caused the radio transmissions in the RB-47 case, and describe one clear feature of the case so it can be determined whether you are on target. That's important. You want to know whether each viewer is on target. Please also send unconditional love to the individuals who experienced this case in the past and those currently investigating it. So on our team, We always send unconditional love to the people who are experiencing the scenario, whatever it is, and also the people who are investigating it. Because A, why not? Even if it doesn't work, it feels good to the viewer. And B, if it does work, you're adding more love to the world, and that's awesome. Also, C, I have some preliminary evidence that experiencing unconditional love on the part of the viewer actually helps the session be more accurate. So that's the way we do that. And what they came up with, and this speaks to, of course, my bias, and you can't get away from the analyst's bias. But what they came up with was the consistent theme was there's two, it's like a membrane, like there's two sides to a membrane, and there's a slanted hole through the membrane. And from this direction, you can't see the past, and from this direction, you can't see the future. And it's like there's a meeting point. And what we were witnessing in the RB-47 incident was a meeting point of those two pieces, the past and the future. Um,
Okay, well, actually, that's almost exactly. I mean, conceptually, that's almost exactly what Jack Sarfati has said about tipping light cones with gravitational fields. So,
well, yeah, the whole we have to, I mean, I don't want to get on my whole soapbox about time, but I sort of do. That's the other big disruption that will happen and needs to happen, which is that we have to stop thinking that time is this linear thing and that there's these
well,
laws about that, because there aren't laws about that.
I now I'm going to interrupt you with your own words. You said this to me. It's one of those things that stuck. Now, for anybody listening, maybe this won't make sense. Maybe it depends on when you hear it. But I remember you and I were talking several months ago, and I was talking about von Neumann probes and the size of the galaxy and stuff. And you'd said to me something like, you know, time and space are not what you think,
Yeah.
and even if they're not malleable in that way, right? Even if you can't modify them, when you start to talk about galactic transits and ancient civilizations and things like that, they kind of lose meaning, right? Like, so for instance, if you have we'll say time travelers from 100 years from now, then there's some concrete meaning there. But time travelers from 50,000 years from now, that might as well be another planet. It doesn't, there's no, you know what I mean? There's no connection. So I think what you're saying is really interesting because it seems like our arrow of time is also an arrow of events. It's an arrow of history. It's kind of a storytelling arrow,
It's
right?
an arrow of a story. That's right. It's a storytelling arrow. And, if you've watched enough Doctor Who, you always have your storytelling arrow, no matter where you are in time. So even if you go to the past, it's still, part of your timeline, right? And so we get to keep that. And I like to reinforce that with people because I think part of the resistance to seeing that time isn't linear is people want to have their storytelling arrow. And it's like you still get to have that.
Yeah.
You still get to have that. And it's really important to recognize that the most the simplest explanation, if you're going to talk about Occam's razor scientifically, the most simple explanation for, people decades ago seeing a cube inside of a sphere and then recently seeing the same thing, the simplest explanation is that's the same object and it just zips around in time. Like it's so simple, right?
Well, and that one interests me. It's things that fall outside of the norm, right? So if people reporting saucer shapes, to me, I'm like, you know what, that could come out of TV, right? Well, yeah, I guess the psychological elements. Is something that I always try and keep in mind, right? And it's, like for instance, okay, Ancient Aliens on TV, and this is something that I don't have answers to this, but now they have people going back and saying, okay, look at all of this ancient art and glyphs and things like that. These people were seeing UFOs, right? But maybe there's another way to look at it and say, we're taking ancient mythology, we're taking our need to have gods and angels and, order to the universe, and we're basically updating that because it's really hard to believe in a guy in the sky with a beard in today's world for a lot of people, but it's really easy to believe in beings from another world that have these superpowers, right? And so there is this element of again, are we deluding ourselves, I guess? Are we just updating our myths to fit with the technologically advanced world?
We may be. What I think we have to remember is that human experience is real, right? And that includes these myths. So I'm not saying it's that has the same um, physical properties as like this glass of water, right? This glass of water has different physical properties than a myth does, but I think a myth might actually have some physical properties. So in other words, I think the way that we're thinking about and interpreting things and believing things actually can have a physical impact on what actually unfolds. So I do think it's important, which is a pretty radical statement. I'm just going to pretend it's normal. But I do think that what happens is that we forget that the way we're interpreting these things, the way that we're using them in our culture, the way that we're doing movies about them, or the way that we're doing TV shows about them, etc., um, shapes what happens. And so what can we do with love? I mean, always to me, it always comes back to like, okay, so maybe there's like whatever. Maybe there's ancient aliens. Maybe it's our future selves coming back to say, hi, how's it going? Or give us crucial information or take our DNA. Or I don't know if you've read Michael Masters' stuff, but he might be an interesting person to talk to you about this. This is his whole hypothesis about taking DNA or filling. He's not sure why, but he's into the whole time travel thing. Um, but when you get to the end of the road, it's like I'm willing to think that any of or all of those things are true. I would like to have some more evidence for all of them, so that we can figure out what's going on. But um, but really, when it comes down to it, is in what ways can we increase love in the world, right? I mean, like we can get distracted by this stuff, but really, how can we use anything, any kind of bit of science, any bit of myth, any bit of story, any bit of human experience to increase love in the world?
What you've been talking about, to me, many of the things you've been talking about, experience and belief and increasing love, to me, this reminds me of the movie Contact, right? Based on the
Yeah.
Carl Sagan book with Jodie Foster.
Jodie Foster, yeah.
And there's this moment, and again, I would recommend that anybody go back and watch that. It's become one of my favorite movies. 2001 is another one, and I personally like Mission to Mars, although it was a little bit hokey.
Arrival.
Yep, that was I don't remember that one that well,
I will tell you
actually.
all about it. It's time
But
travel, woman scientist saves the world. Yes.
but in Contact, the thing that I liked about that was actually there's a split second moment towards the end where she's speaking in front of Congress where
Yeah.
Matthew McConaughey sits up, right? And he has this expression on his face. And that was the one that caught me because, at different points during the movie, he has these discussions with her, right? He plays a man of faith. He's a religious person. And he talks with her about faith and belief and accepting things that you can't understand. And I believe he talks with her about love and things like that. And as a scientist, especially someone with trauma, right? Because she's lost her father and she has a lot of pain in that movie. She basically denies that. She says, "No, that's not what I'm about. It's got to be objective and provable, and this and that and the other thing." And you can tell, at least in the movie, for me at least, it felt like he understood that he couldn't reach her, but he
Yeah.
held out hope, right?
Yeah.
And so then there's that moment at the end of the movie where she's speaking in front of Congress and she's like, I had this experience and it was powerful and it showed us how important we all are. And she's like, and I can't prove it, but I wish I could share it with every single person. And he sits up and he sits forward in the movie. And it was like that for me, I was like, that right there, that's the
Yeah.
moment.
Because she got it that her subjectivity was really key. Like her subjectivity was key. She used her voice to communicate it, and then she got it that human beings are important. She got it that the human soul is important and that it even exists. And that's why he's like, yes. So yeah, no, I think that's a key moment. And I think that's if, you know, we can and should try to figure out what's going on with UAPs, but even more important is this human soul piece, right? As we go through like dealing with AI, all these changes that are happening in terms of people not having jobs because they're automation, et cetera, acknowledging the value and importance of the human soul is It's like what we all need to be doing, you know. It's like, well, what else can I say? Like, this is it, you know. And so, to the extent that we can use science to support the value of the human soul and to really dig into that, I think that makes all the difference.
Wonderful. Well, Julia, let me close things for today. Let me close by asking, how can people learn more about your work? I think that's the most important thing. What is the website they can go to learn more about how they can, well, learn more about remote viewing, learn more about your work, learn more about unconditional love?
Okay, those are three websites. Um, Because I don't have like a Julia Mossbridge website. I suppose I should, but I don't. So I'm gonna tell you um, the three websites. Premonitioncode.com is all about precognition and precognitive remote viewing. I wrote the book, The Premonition Code with Teresa Chung. So the premonitioncode.com. Um, my nonprofit that I've co-founded with Wolfram Alderson is called Tilt, the Institute for Love and Time, and that's at loveandtime.org. And that's about using the tools of technology and scientific research to bring the experience of unconditional love and mental time travel, which actually we showed help people heal, um, to some extent in a pilot study. You can find that at loveandtime.org. Very proud of that nonprofit, amazing team. And then the my for-profit consulting work, I help guide people in what's called transformational discovery management. So these kind of transformational discoveries that we've been talking about need to be managed in terms of culture, strategy, et cetera. And that's at mossbridgeinstitute.com. And it's through that where I train people with regular training techniques in intuition and precognition. And recently I've been working with Cartman Medina on training people who are interested in intelligence analysis in precognition and intuition. So that's mossbridgeinstitute.com.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much for your time today, Julia.
Thanks. It's been great talking with you as usual, Tim.